On February 20th, 2016, David Cameron, the then UK Prime Minister, announced the referendum for Brexit. UK's membership in the EU was in question. On that day that they announced the referendum, the pound fell against all of the major currencies. That news caused a lot of volatility in the markets. Then, on June 23rd, 2016, the referendum happened, and each UK citizen was given the power to cast a vote on whether the UK should stay in the EU or leave the EU. There was a debate going on before this referendum of whether the UK was gaining more from being in the EU or if the UK would have gained more by leaving the EU. There was the question on the balance of power and the relationship between the EU and the UK. Ultimately, the UK citizens with a slim margin voted for the UK to leave the EU. And the very next day, on June 24th, the pound fell to its lowest level in 30 years, valued at $1.34. In fact, by October, the pound would fall more than 1,000 pips to $1.21. Its historical low. Brexit was all over the news. Even before the referendum announcement, it was such a big global event because the results of Brexit were going to change the world. Whether to stay in the EU or to leave the EU is very big. Same thing as with other global events. And that is why it is important for Forex traders to pay attention to what's going on in the news, to pay attention to geopolitical events, these things that can change the landscapes of markets and relationships between countries. We're going to talk about the types of geopolitical events to watch out for and how you can utilize them in your trading strategies. Geopolitical events are events that involve the interactions between nations, governments, and entire regions. They can last overnight, they can last a few months, they can last years, but their impacts on the Forex markets are usually very influential and great. For instance, if you're thinking of geopolitical events, you might think of the US-China trade war, the Russia-Ukraine war, or COVID-19. Peace talks, trade agreements, these positive geopolitical events all impact the Forex markets. And therefore, I'm going to show you a few types of geopolitical events. So the first one would be political instability. Political instability, including political upheavals, regime changes, and changes in leadership, can cause uncertainty in the markets. Investors can lose confidence if the process for changing from one party to another causes a lot of harm or disarray in society. And when they lose confidence, then they want to take away their money. Investors taking away their money can cause the economy to dip and therefore currency values to weaken. If you're thinking of political instability, I would say look at the last US presidential election. A lot of media coverage. Why? Because you have two candidates with two polarizing policies that could either strengthen or weaken the US economy, the US dollar, which every major currency is netted against. Then we're going to talk about trade disputes. Trade disputes, basically my country versus your country, can lead to trade tariffs. Tariffs is when I deem the goods from your country, the goods and services from your country to be maybe dangerous or unnecessary, or I have my own political motives. I'm going to tax your goods. That way, as they're entering my country, they become more expensive. And because they're more expensive, my people are going to buy less, and therefore the amount of imports from your country is going to reduce. That, in rare cases, can lead to trade wars. Take the US-China trade war, for example. How these two behemoths of countries are going back at each other, giving each other tariffs, giving each other sanctions, all in an effort for global dominance on world trade. Next, we have economic sanctions. Now, a country can be sanctioned depending on how they interact with other countries. Basically, who do they offend? So for a country that is violating human rights, they might offend countries that are big on human rights, like the US and the United Nations. If they violate trade agreements, this could cause other countries within that trading bloc to retaliate against that one country and then impose sanctions on them. Economic sanctions can lead to a restriction of capital of trade, capital outflows, and a weaker currency value. Let's look at the Russian-Ukraine war, for instance. In retaliation for Russia invading Ukraine, NATO and the US all imposed sanctions on the Russian economy, causing the Russian ruble to devalue tremendously. Next, we have geopolitical conflicts. These conflicts include military conflicts, territorial disputes, or even acts of terrorism. This can cause tension between countries and uncertainty in the markets. For instance, if I have real estate investments in another country that just started a civil war, the first thing on my mind is the protection of my investment. And that's going to cause me to want to sell all my real estate because they can be destroyed from bombs or whatever. Sell all my real estate and park it in another safe country in a safe currency, like maybe the US dollar, the Swiss franc, or the Japanese yen. They call it flight to safety. And geopolitical conflicts are usually the causes of flight to safety. In the next video, we're going to finish up our discussion of the types of geopolitical events and then talk about politics and the role of politics for investors in the markets and how us Forex traders can take advantage of political changes and policy announcements in our trading. So, see you soon.